She walked into the bank like any other customer, quiet, unnoticed, with paint on her hands and a worn paper bag clutched to her side. No one paid attention. A well-dressed man even smirked when she withdrew exactly $500, 0 cents. But just 12 minutes later, the parking lot was flooded with black SUVs, military, silent, precise. What did this soft-spoken woman know? Why did her simple withdrawal trigger a full-scale lockdown? No one could have imagined that beneath her paint-streaked jacket lived a secret that had saved 27 lives and had gone untold for nearly a decade. This isn't a story about war, it's about the kind of hero who disappears before anyone thinks to say thank you. Let me take you to the beginning. Every town has someone who moves through it like a shadow, present but never noticed. For suburban Missouri, that person was Hannah Flores. At 35, she lived alone in a small rented bungalow 2 blocks from the main road. Her front yard was half dirt, half paint-stained gravel, and always smelled faintly of turpentine. She wasn't the kind of woman you'd look at twice. Plain clothes, quiet manner, a face often hidden behind strands of hair windblown from work. But if you looked closely, you'd notice her skin bore a story, her hands especially, stained in layers of old paint like a faded road map. Fingernails lined with stubborn white residue that no brush could ever clean. Hannah was a freelance house painter, not the kind hired by big renovation firms, but the one you'd call when your garage needed a fresh coat or your back fence had rotted from years of weather. She never advertised, never bargained. She showed up, worked silently, and left, only when the job was done. Her clients were usually surprised by the precision of her lines and the patience in her brushstrokes, but they rarely remembered her name. Every 15th of the month, like clockwork, she'd walk to the same neighborhood bank. She always carried a paper bag, old and crinkled, its edges duct-taped from being used too many times. Inside it, nothing fancy, just folded bills, scribbled notes, and sometimes a receipt. She never brought a purse. The bank employees knew her face, vaguely. She was the paint lady. She always wore the same faded jeans, the same canvas jacket, splotched with the history of every job she'd done. Blue, green, ivory, sunflower yellow. Her clothes were a walking portfolio. She never complained when the lines were long, never sighed when the printer jammed. She waited quietly, always standing with her weight slightly shifted onto one foot, her paper bag held in both hands like a fragile thing. To most people, Hannah was unremarkable, but to the observant few there was something about her, a stillness that wasn't empty, but full, like a room that hadn't been ended in years but held something sacred, just out of sight. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her voice was soft, deliberate, shaped by thought before sound. That Saturday morning the sky was overcast and the parking lot half full when she entered the bank. She stepped inside unnoticed, as always, quietly joining the line. Her shoes made no sound on the tiled floor, but her presence, if anyone had looked, carried the weight of a woman who was never late, never lost, and never made unnecessary noise. No one could have guessed that in just minutes, this ordinary woman with paint on her sleeves would be the reason the military shut down an entire city block. The line at the bank moved slowly, as it always did on weekends. Parents shuffled behind restless children. A teenager scrolled endlessly through his phone. A man in a tailored blazer tapped his foot with performative impatience, checking his watch as if the minutes offended him personally. Hannah stood quietly as she had for years, without fidgeting or looking around. Her paper bag was tucked under her arm and her eyes stayed fixed on the floor just ahead. There was a kind of grace in her stillness, but no one noticed. 2 places ahead, someone was disputing a withdrawal. Behind her, someone muttered about the weight. Hannah didn't flinch. She never did. There was something steady in her, like an old foundation beneath a crumbling house. Unshakable. Or maybe just resigned. The man behind her finally broke the silence. $500 in cash? He said, mostly to himself, but loud enough for the line to hear. Somebody hit the scratch-offs this morning. A few chuckled. Hannah didn't. She stepped up to the counter when her turn came. Her voice, as always, was soft and deliberate. I'd like to withdraw $500, 0 cents, please, in 20s and 10s. He slid her ID across the counter. The teller, a young woman named Emily, recognized her. Not by name, no one ever used Hannah's name, but by presence. The woman who came on the 15th. Always quietly, always the same amount. Emily found herself calming a little when Hannah was in her line. It was hard to explain. While she processed the withdrawal, Emily's co-worker leaned over and whispered, barely masking the smirk, "Probably not clean money. Do you see those hands? She looks like she's been painting fences for cash in some alley." Emily didn't respond. She glanced down again at Hannah's hands, fingers rough with years of labor, paint stubborn beneath the nails. But there was no grime, no mess, just proof. Proof of work, honest, repetitive, unnoticed work. She felt a sudden rush of shame at her co-worker's tone. Why is it so easy for people to mock quiet? Emily counted out the money, her fingers careful on each bill. "Here you are, Miss Flores," she said. She added the name intentionally this time. Hannah nodded, quietly slipping the bills into the bag. She folded the edge again, sealing it with a strip of old tape. Then, just as Emily was about to hand her the receipt, Hannah placed a small folded piece of paper on the counter. "And could you please make sure this gets to the right person?" she asked. Her voice wasn't uncertain, it was purposeful, a request wrapped in history. Emily blinked. "Mom?" Now, Hannah was already turning to leave. She didn't take the receipt, didn't look back. The paper bag swung gently at her side as she pushed open the glass door and disappeared into the cloudy morning. Emily looked down at the note, just a scrap of paper, folded once, no markings on the outside. She held it for a second longer than necessary, feeling something shift beneath her ribs. Then she opened it. At first glance it looked like nothing. Just a folded slip of paper, creased once, no logo, no name. Emily turned it over in her hands, expecting something ordinary, a question about fees, maybe a request for a form. But the moment she unfolded it, her breath caught. The handwriting was neat, bold, every letter pressed with intention. This wasn't a scrawl of someone unsure. It read, "Urgent. If anyone from Unit 27B survived, please fax emergency code 93- to the number below." Underneath, a string of numbers, a military fax line. Emily knew it instantly. Her brother was stationed in Texas, and she'd seen the format before. Government, Regional Command. And in the bottom, just 2 letters. HF. He blinked. Once, twice. The sounds of the bank returned suddenly. Printers whirring, coins dropping, the low buzz of fluorescent lights. But Emily felt like she was underwater. The name, the notes, it didn't belong in this world of overdrafts and deposit slips. She read it again and again. A part of her wanted to ignore it, toss it in the shred pile. Maybe it was a prank or some delusional cry for attention, but something in Hannah's voice, calm, clear, serious, lingered. She hadn't sounded frantic or confused. She had sounded prepared. Emily walked quickly to the back office, her pulse rising in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she loaded the paper into the bank's old fax machine. Dust clung to the glass, but it hummed to life as she punched in the number from the note. She pressed send. There was no confirmation and no immediate callback, just a slow beep, a mechanical click, and then silence. Emily stared at the machine for a moment. Then she glanced at the door, half expecting Hannah to still be standing there. But she was gone. Exactly 12 minutes later, the first black SUV turned into the parking lot. It didn't screech to a stop, it didn't flash lights, it moved with quiet, deliberate control, like it knew exactly what it was doing, and had done it many times before. 2 more vehicles followed behind. Their license plates were unmarked, but their formation was militaric, precise, commanding, unmistakable. Inside the bank, no one had noticed yet, but Emily stood frozen by the window, her heart pounding. She had sent the fax, she had followed the instructions on a note from a woman with paint on her sleeves. And now something was coming. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, just as the line at the bank started to move again. No one noticed the black SUV that had stopped directly in front, nor the 2 others that followed, forming a quiet blockade at the entrance. And then they stepped out. Men and women in civilian clothing, but with the unmistakable posture of military personnel. Shoulders squared, movements economical, eyes sharp. No shouting, no sirens, just presence. Heavy, focused, trained. Emily looked up from the fax machine just in time to see them enter. The leader, a tall man with a closely cropped haircut and a dark jacket stitched with a subtle insignia, walked in first. His steps were measured. In his hand he held an envelope and a folded document. The room hadn't yet caught up with the moment. A man on the phone continued his loud conversation. A child clinked coins into a donation box near the door. The well-dressed man from earlier leaned on the wall, scrolling through messages, but all of that stopped when the tall man stepped forward and spoke. Good morning, he said calmly, voice firm but not aggressive. My name is Major Gregory Hunt. We're responding to a communication that originated from this location 12 minutes ago. The bank manager straightened behind the counter. Excuse me? We received a high-priority code from a fax sent from this branch. We're here to verify its authenticity and confirm the identity of the sender. He raised the paper. Code 93-. Does that mean anything to anyone here? Silence. Emily's mouth opened, then closed again. She felt the eyes of her co-workers, the manager, and even a few customers beginning to shift toward her. Finally, she stepped forward, voice small. I sent it, but only because of a note. A woman left it. Hunt's expression changed, not with suspicion, but something close to relief. Was her name Hannah Flores? I don't know, Emily admitted. She comes in every month. She doesn't talk much, paint on her clothes. She just asked me to send the fax. She asked me to make sure it got to the right person, Emily said. And then she left. The room had gone still now. Conversations died. Even the clicking of keyboards had paused. Hunt glanced at one of his team members, who nodded. Then he turned back to the room and spoke, not just to Emily, but to everyone listening. She's the reason 27 soldiers are still alive. Uspers didn't erupt. Not yet. It was too strange, too unreal. People looked at each other in confusion. A few shook their heads. The well-dressed man frowned. What are you talking about? That woman? Hunt nodded. We've been searching for her for almost a decade. Until today, we only had a first name and a rumor. The bank, just moments before a hum of mundane transactions, now felt like the set of a scene nobody understood. Phones were lowered. Children were hushed. Something serious, something big was unfolding in front of them. And it all started with a woman no one had seen. Major Hunt placed the envelope gently on the counter, his voice lowered, but the weight behind it grew. 9 years ago, during a night training operation, a special operations unit was deployed near a decommissioned chemical facility. There had been a miscommunication, wrong coordinates. What should have been a controlled exercise turned into a silent emergency. His eyes scanned the room. People were still, listening. We were dropped too close to a leaking chemical storage plant. Toxic gas had begun to seep into the surrounding area. No visibility, no comms, and worse, no idea we were headed directly into a lethal containment zone. He paused. For a moment his composure wavered. It wasn't the story of someone repeating a report. It was a memory. One he hadn't retold. Often. The fog was thick, yellowish, choking. We had no night vision, no masks, just instincts, and we were failing. Emily glanced down at the hands she'd judged just an hour before. Now they took on a different shape in her memory, hands that might have once drawn a path out of death. Major Hunt continued, his voice softer now. That's when the arrows started appearing. A ripple went through the room. White arrows, she said. Painted on walls, on pavement, on broken fences, fresh, leading away from the danger zone. We didn't know if they were warnings or traps, but we followed them. Because we had nothing else. His voice grew even quieter. Those arrows saved 27 of us. Emily's heart pounded. We reached a safe zone 4 miles out, Hunt said, and when we turned to look for whoever had left them, the fog was lifting, and there was no one there. For weeks, they tried to track the mysterious painter. All they had was rumor, a civilian painter, a woman, maybe working at a nearby site. No security footage, no name, no file. Just second-hand accounts. A shadow. And then she was gone, Hunt said. He opened the envelope. Inside was a faded copy of an old message, one that had been filed years ago at Northern Command. At the bottom, there was the same handwritten signature, HF. Emily swallowed hard. She saved us, Hunt said simply, but never asked for anything, never came forward, never wanted to be known. The man who had mocked her earlier leaned forward, stunned. Wait, her? Hunt turned to face him directly. Yes, the woman you laughed at in line this morning. The weight of it fell heavy, guilt flickered in the man's eyes. Around the room, expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to awe. She could have died that night, Hunt added. Instead, she chose to walk into danger and leave a path for strangers she'd never see again. He paused, looking down at the note Emily had faxed that morning. And now, after all this time, she's reached out, not to demand recognition, but to ask a single question. I folded the note and read the last line aloud. I don't need thanks. I just want to know, are you all still alive? Silence filled the room, not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind, when truth meets humility. And just like that, the woman who had faded into the background of every Saturday morning had become the center of a story no one would forget. Just as the room began to absorb the weight of what Major Hunt had shared, the glass doors opened again with a soft chime. This time the man who entered was older, silver hair neatly combed back, his gait slow but proud. He wore a simple grey coat and a slight limp on his left leg, revealing an old injury. His eyes scanned the room with quiet determination until they landed on Hunt, who immediately stepped forward to greet him. "Colonel Mercer," Hunt said with reverence. The retired officer gave a nod, then reached into his coat and pulled out a tablet. "I was told you might have footage," he said, his voice gravelly, weathered by command and time, and handed him the device. On screen, the grainy security footage from earlier that morning, a woman with a worn jacket and jeans stained with decades of work, quietly standing at the counter with a crinkled paper bag. Vaso doesn't speak. We were staring. And then he reached up, removed his glasses, and wiped his eyes. "I left her," he whispered. "That's the one." The silence was shattered, not by sound, but by emotion. The colonel, who had once commanded an elite unit, who had faced death and made impossible calls, was crying. He steadied himself against the counter, voice cracking. We had gone nearly 2 miles in the wrong direction. No GPS, no comms, no markers. We were headed straight toward a ruptured chemical tank. It would have killed us all. He looked round the bank, eyes glistening, and then these arrows started to appear, white paint. We thought it was luck. We didn't know it was hurt. His voice deepened, filled with reverence. She wasn't just saving us. She was thinking ahead. She painted arrows behind us too. So if we'd doubled back, we wouldn't have returned to danger. Every move was intentional, strategic. People around the room began to shift, visibly affected. One customer placed a hand over their heart. A woman teared up quietly, her child clinging to her arm. Mercer turned to Hunt, his expression raw. "We were blind in that fog. We would have walked into death without her." And Mercer's quiet signal, 2 uniformed officers entered, carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a carefully folded American flag and a black velvet pouch. They placed it on the bank counter with solemn precision. "This flag," Mercer said, voice steady now, "was meant to be presented to a civilian hero, approved by the Department of Defense under Code 93-, but we could never find her." He opened the pouch, revealing a small silver plaque. "Anaha Flores. Civilian Rescue, Operation Nightfall. Unit 27B, Survivor Count 27. A gasp swept through the room, not from the spectacle, but from the intimacy of truth revealed. "She didn't want this," Mercer said, his voice softer now. "She never came back for it, and when we searched, she had disappeared without a trace. We thought maybe she'd been a ghost in the fog." Emily, still standing beside the counter, whispered, "She didn't disappear, she just kept painting." Mercer nodded. A beat passed. Then he looked round and said what many were feeling but couldn't speak. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who leave before anyone can thank them. By the time Colonel Mercer stepped away from the counter, no one in the bank was checking their phones anymore. Conversations stopped entirely. It felt as if time had bent around that single moment, a truth too quiet for headlines, too heavy for applause. But the truth, once revealed, never retreats, it ripples. The bank manager, a man known for his impatience and efficiency, stood silently for several minutes before asking the one question lingering on everyone's mind. But why now? Why would she reach out after all these years? Major Hunt exhaled. Yesterday, a false report circulated on a veterans forum. It claimed several members of a special operations unit had died from long-term exposure to a chemical incident during a training op. We didn't release names, but she must have seen. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A still image appeared. Hannah, standing outside the bank just that morning, clutching her old paper bag, looking down at the sidewalk. She hadn't known someone was watching. But someone always is. Note that she left, Hunt said, was her way of checking in. Not for recognition, not for credit, just to know if we were still breathing. He turned to Emily. "And that withdrawal? $500, 0 cents, same amount, same day, every single month." The bank's internal system confirmed it. For 9 straight years, Hannah had withdrawn exactly $500, 0 cents on the 15th of each month. The transaction matched a separate donation record, anonymous deposits made to the widow of Sergeant Kevin Miller, the only soldier in Unit 27B who'd suffered permanent injuries from that night. He had survived the fog, but never fully recovered. He passed away 3 years ago, but the money kept coming. Molly whispered. She was helping his family all this time without even knowing them? Hunt nodded. Never missed a month, never signed a check, just a promise, kept in silence. The room shifted again, not in sound, but in weight. Eyes softened, hearts opened. The man in the blazer, the one who had mocked her that morning, now sat with his hands pressed together, trembling. His voice cracked as he spoke. "My son enlisted last fall," he said quietly. "I laughed at her. I thought she looked like someone who had nothing." He blinked hard. She was giving everything. Without a word, he stood and left the bank. Emily didn't chase after him. She didn't need to. The next morning, when Hannah returned to the nursing home to make her usual payment for her mother's care, the front desk nurse smiled gently and slid her check back across the counter. "It's been taken care of," she said. Hannah frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "A donor," the nurse replied. "Anonymous. They paid 5 years in advance." Hannah stood still for a moment and slowly nodded. She folded the check and slipped it into her jacket. That same day, she took the money to the Veterans Rehabilitation Center across town and quietly delivered several boxes of art supplies, brushes, easels, cans of paint, not for murals, not for grand tributes, for healing. Later that week, the staff at the bank received small packages, each containing a miniature can of white paint and a note. Let each person have a chance to be seen as good. From that day on, no one in that bank spoke of Hannah aloud again, not out of shame, but out of respect. Her picture was never framed on the wall, but a copy, small, worn, quiet, was taped inside every teller's drawer. A reminder, even in a world quick to judge, quiet goodness still holds the power to shift the ground beneath us. On the 9th anniversary of that night, the night a woman with a paint can redirect death, Hannah woke before sunrise, as she always did. The morning was still, the air soft with pre-dawn chill. She stepped onto her small front porch, expecting nothing, but something waited there for her. 27 cans of white paint, stacked in perfect symmetry, no note, no name. She stood still, her breath visible in the cold, eyes scanning the quiet street. There was no one in sight, no car engine fading into the distance, just stillness. She didn't need to ask who sent them. She already knew. That same week, using those very cans, she painted a memorial on the back wall of the local VFW hall. Not a mural of soldiers, not flags, not names. There's 27 white arrows, each pointing upward toward the sky. When a local reporter finally found her there and asked what the arrows meant, she didn't give a long explanation. "It means direction," she said simply. "When direction is needed most." That was it. She never went back to the bank, never spoke in interviews. When persistent reporters reached her at job sites, she always gave the same answer. "I'm just someone who happened to have paint when paint was needed. That doesn't make me special, just useful." But stories like hers don't stay hidden forever. The hashtag 500FootOn continued to spread, not as a trend, but as a movement. Veterans across the country began sharing their own stories, moments where someone had helped them quietly, without a name, without expecting anything in return. And across town, at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, the donated art supplies helped men and women rebuild parts of themselves they thought were lost. Some painted portraits, others painted nothing but arrows. In one small wing, a mural appeared. Weeks later, 27 arrows, painted by 27 different hands, each in their style, all pointing forward. Hannah visited the center only once. She didn't announce her presence. She just walked the halls, nodded to those who looked up, and left behind a fresh can of white paint in the supply room. Back in her neighborhood, people no longer looked through her. They saw her. Some nodded, some offered to help carry her ladders. A few stopped to shake her hand, her paint-stained hand. The man in the blazer, once mocked her, found her painting a picket fence one afternoon. His son had just completed his first overseas deployment. He stood beside her awkwardly, trying to find words. "I just wanted to say, I didn't know," he finally said. Hannah didn't scold him, didn't correct him. She simply reached into her jacket and handed him a plain white card. On the back was a number, written by hand. This line goes directly to Major Hunt, she said. If your son ever needs anything at all, just call. Tell him Hannah sent you. And with that, she returned to her brush, dragging white along wood in slow, steady lines. Years later, her story was told in classrooms. At the National Defense Museum, a single photo was displayed. Hannah washing her hands beside a can of white paint, taken from a grainy security camera 9 years prior. Next to it, her handwritten words. Please save that honor for those who returned home, and for those who didn't. No grand statue was ever made. No medal was awarded in person. But sometimes the world doesn't need statues. It just needs someone to lead a sign pointing the way forward. And sometimes all it takes is paint.